There are reasons people give for staying quiet that sound like principles. I relied on those. I told myself I was being fair, that I was resisting the urge to simplify something that was complicated, that I was honoring Danielle's experience by not inserting myself into it prematurely. These explanations were neat. They fit into sentences I had learned to trust. What I didn't say, what I didn't even think to say at the time, was that I was afraid of being wrong. Not wrong in the abstract sense, wrong in a way that had consequences, wrong in a way that would require me to answer questions I couldn't control, wrong in a way that might follow me beyond the moment and attach itself to my name. Danielle's situation had moved beyond the stage where it could be handled with reassurance. There were meetings now, emails that used formal language, conversations that happened behind closed doors and were summarized afterward with phrases like, "we discussed," and "we considered." The vocabulary shifted, so did the stakes. I was adjacent to all of it, close enough to understand what was happening, far enough to avoid being formally involved. That position felt safe. When Danielle talked about the meetings, she was careful with her words. She didn't accuse, she described. She noted who said what. She remembered the order in which things happened. She paid attention to tone. She paid attention to what wasn't said. Listening to her, I felt a growing unease, not because I doubted her, but because I believed her and didn't know what that belief would require of me. She never asked me to attend the meetings with her. She never asked me to speak on her behalf. If anything, she seemed to be protecting me from the obligation. She knew, I think, how easily concern turns into liability. That knowledge should have humbled me. Instead, I used it as permission. There is a difference between being supportive and being useful. I was supportive. I listened. I sympathized. I validated her feelings when they were framed in ways that didn't demand action. When the conversation drifted toward specifics, toward decisions that might need witnesses, corroboration, or collective pressure, I found ways to slow things down. Let's wait and see. Maybe they'll respond once they've reviewed everything. You don't want to rush this. I sounded reasonable. I always sound reasonable. Danielle noticed this before I did. I can see that now in the way she stopped asking me questions that began with, "Do you think?" She stopped inviting my opinion. She stopped treating me as someone whose agreement mattered. At the time, I told myself she was becoming more self-reliant. There was one afternoon when she came over unannounced. That alone should have told me something was wrong. Danielle never showed up without checking first. She was considerate like that, or careful. She sat at my kitchen table and spread out a stack of papers, emails, notes, printouts of policies she had highlighted in different colors. She didn't ask me to read them. She just let them sit there between us, as if their presence might do some of the talking for her. I glanced at them, then looked back up at her. She was watching me, not intently, but with a kind of practiced stillness, waiting. "They keep saying they need more information," she said, "but every time I give it, they say it's not enough." I nodded. I said something about bureaucracy. I said something about how these processes take time. She waited. "You were there that day," she said finally. "Not accusing, just factual. You heard what he said." I felt my chest tighten. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was anticipation. The sense that I was approaching a line I had been pretending wasn't there. I said, "I remember it differently." That wasn't entirely true. I remembered it clearly. I remembered the tone, the pause afterward, the way the room shifted slightly before moving on. I remembered thinking, in the moment, that it was unfair. What I meant was that I didn't remember it in a way I was prepared to stand behind. Danielle didn't argue. She didn't insist. She nodded slowly, as if she were filing something away. "Okay," she said. That was it. No raised voice, no appeal, just acceptance. Later, I would replay that moment over and over, searching for the exact second when I could have made a different choice without it feeling dramatic, without it feeling like I was taking on something larger than myself. At the time, all I felt was relief. Relief that she hadn't pushed, relief that I hadn't had to explain myself further, relief that the conversation ended without requiring me to commit to anything concrete. That relief should have unsettled me. Instead, I mistook it for resolution. After that, Danielle stopped bringing documents to my apartment. She stopped mentioning meetings unless I asked. She stopped updating me on details that would have required me to form an opinion. She didn't cut me off. That would have been easier to recognize. She just adjusted her expectations. I remained her friend in all the ways that didn't cost me anything. I helped her move once. I lent her money when she was short. I listened when she needed to vent. I told myself these things mattered. And they did, just not in the way that counted. The truth I avoided was simple. I didn't want to be responsible for what might happen if I spoke. If I corroborated her account and the institution pushed back, would I be expected to persist? If the situation escalated, would I be asked to testify, to repeat myself, to be scrutinized? What if they asked questions I couldn't answer perfectly? What if my memory faltered? What if my certainty wavered? I imagined myself being seen as unreliable, emotional, overinvested. I imagined people wondering why I was involved at all. I told myself these were reasonable concerns, that it was better to stay out of something unless I could be absolutely sure. But certainty is a luxury in situations like that, and I had it in ways Danielle didn't. She didn't have the option of waiting for clarity. The situation was already shaping her days, her sleep, her future. She was being asked to carry the weight of proof while continuing to perform stability. I watched her do this and admired her restraint. What I didn't do was match it with courage. I had convinced myself that neutrality was a form of integrity, that by not taking sides, I was preserving fairness, that by staying silent, I was avoiding harm. It never occurred to me that harm was already happening, and that my silence was simply keeping me separate from it. Responsibility, I believed, belonged to those with authority, to administrators, to committees, to processes. I did not yet understand that responsibility also belongs to the people who know what's happening and choose not to disrupt it. At the time, all I knew was that staying quiet allowed my life to continue uninterrupted. My classes progressed, my relationships remained uncomplicated, my sense of myself stayed intact. That felt like evidence that I was doing the right thing. I didn't realize I was confusing comfort with correctness. By the time I began to sense that something irreversible was unfolding, I had already practiced too much restraint to intervene naturally. Silence had become my role. Speaking would have required an explanation, not just of what I knew, but of why I hadn't said it sooner. That was the responsibility I didn't want. So I stayed where I was, close enough to feel informed, distant enough to avoid consequence. I told myself that this was the most ethical position available to me. I would not understand how wrong that was until much later, when the cost of that decision had settled fully into someone else's life.